Over the years, Nvidia and AMD have brought us some truly iconic graphic cards that have stood the test of time. Many of these cards are still relevant today. When you're out there scouring the used market looking for the best price to performance ratio, two GPUs consistently come into the spotlight: the Radeon RX 580 and the GeForce GTX 1060. The great news is that both of these cards are readily available to buyers on the secondhand market, and they come at some pretty attractive price points. What's even more intriguing about this comparison is the parallels between these two GPUs extend beyond their availability and affordability. Their performance remains strikingly similar even in the year 2023, making them both outstanding choices for 1080p gaming, especially given their wallet-friendly price tags. In today's video, we're going to dive deep into a head-to-head comparison between these two cards to determine which one offers the most value for budget-conscious gamers in 2023. So, if you're on the lookout for a cost-effective graphics card that can still provide a reliable 1080p gaming experience, you're in the right place. Stick around to find out which budget-friendly option might be a better fit for you and your gaming needs. Before we dive into this comparison, I want to express my gratitude to all of you, my viewers, for the incredible support you've shown recently. It's been an absolute blast creating content and sharing my experiences testing and building with budget hardware over the past few months. I've got a treasure trove of exciting content lined up, including more GPU tests, budget-friendly builds, and a whole lot more. If you're as enthusiastic about this journey as I am and eager to explore the world of budget-friendly gaming and hardware, I invite you to consider subscribing to the channel. By doing so, you'll stay in the loop and won't miss out on any of the upcoming content. Thanks again for your fantastic support, and now let's get right into the showdown between the RX 580 and the GeForce GTX 1060. Absolutely, setting clear parameters is crucial for a fair and meaningful comparison. Let's outline the three key factors we'll consider in this Radeon RX 580 versus GeForce GTX 1060 comparison. First, we'll begin by analyzing the technical specifications of both cards. This includes core clock speeds, memory capacity, memory type, and any other relevant specs. Understanding these specs is essential as they often determine a graphics card's long-term performance and capabilities. Next, we'll take a close look at the current prices of the Radeon RX 580 and the GeForce GTX 1060 on the used market. Cost is a pivotal factor for consumers, especially on the budget GPU segment. The monetary investment alone could be the deciding factor between two components in any PC build. And last, we'll test the in-game performance. Ultimately, what matters most to gamers is how well these GPUs perform in real-world gaming scenarios. We'll conduct comprehensive tests across a range of popular titles spanning the last decade or so. This will provide a clear understanding of how these cards stack up in terms of gaming performance. By considering these parameters, I aim to provide a well-rounded and informative comparison that helps viewers make informed decisions when choosing between the RX 580 and GTX 1060 for their gaming needs. Let's start by explaining some of the background and specs of each of these video cards. The AMD Radeon RX 580, which is based on the GCN 4.0 architecture and manufactured using the 14nm process, has a Polaris 20 core. It made its debut in April 2017 for $229. Equipped with 2,304 shading units, 144 texture mapping units, and 32 render output units, it boasts a base clock speed of 1257 MHz, a boost clock speed of 1340 MHz, and a memory clock of 2000 MHz. In terms of memory, it's available in both 4GB and 8GB variants utilizing GDDR5 memory on a 256-bit memory bus. For today's comparison, we'll primarily focus on the 8GB version, which remains more relevant in 2023. Noteworthy features of this card include native support for DirectX 12 and Vulkan 1.3. The particular RX 580 that I own is an 8GB XFX Black Edition, which comes with a 5% overclock of 1405 MHz. I acquired it a few months ago at the reasonable price of $72 and has already been featured in a video review on the channel. The GTX 1060 operates on the Pascal architecture, utilizing a 16nm manufacturing process and housing the GP106 core. It was originally introduced in July 2016 with an MSRP of $299, making it nearly a year older and $70 more than the RX 580. With 1,280 shading units, 80 TMUs, and 48 ROPs, it offers a base clock speed of 1506 MHz, a boost clock speed of 1709 MHz, and a memory clock of 2002 MHz. Similar to the RX 580, it was available in two memory configurations, albeit smaller. with options of 3GB and 6GB using GDDR5 video memory on a 192-bit bus width. It also shares support for DX12 and Vulkan 1.3, and as of September 2023, both the RX 580 and GTX 1060 are still receiving game-ready driver support from their manufacturers. The specific GTX 1060 I have here is the 6GB MSI OC V1 model, which has a 3% overclock applied to both the base and boost frequencies. I got this one locally for just $40. Now that I've provided some insights into each card, let's delve into a comparison of their key specifications to determine which one holds a more favorable position. It's worth noting, however, that this comparison, while enjoyable, might not paint the complete picture. Relying solely on the on-paper specs can sometimes lead to misconception, as in-game performance can be influenced by various factors. With that said, let's begin by looking at their release dates. The RX 580 has a slight advantage here, being approximately 10 months newer than the GTX 1060, although this doesn't necessarily guarantee longer driver support. Moving on to the overall render configuration, the RX 580 takes the lead with higher shading units and TMUs, however it falls slightly short in terms of render output units compared to the GTX 1060. When it comes to memory configuration, the RX 580 remains superior with a maximum of 8GB and a larger memory bus. Now, in terms of clock speeds, the GTX 1060 boasts a significant advantage, with both its base and boost clock speeds. This could potentially play a significant role in the in-game testing. When it comes to these stats on paper, I'm inclined to declare this matchup a draw. Although the RX 580 comes out ahead in more of the categories I've compared, I believe that the significantly higher clock speeds of the GTX 1060 will balance things out on the gaming front. In terms of the cost comparison, I conducted research by examining the 25 lowest priced used units available on eBay's Buy It Now listings and calculated the average cost. The 8GB RX 580 generally appeared to be the more budget-friendly option, with an average total cost, including shipping, averaging around $75. Some listings even offered this card for as low as $65. On the other hand, the GTX 1060 tended to be somewhat pricier, with an average cost of approximately $85 and often hovering around $75 at its lowest. It's essential to keep in mind that prices can fluctuate and you might come across sellers offering these cards at lower rates. Additionally, exploring your local used market through platforms like Facebook Marketplace can often yield better deals. So when considering your budget, the RX 580 seems to be the more cost-effective choice based on the data I've gathered from the eBay listings, but it's always wise to explore various sources for the best deal. For today's in-game testing, I'll be utilizing my open-air test bench, a rig that's made appearances on the channel numerous times. This setup features a 4-core, 8-thread i3-10105F processor, 16GB of DDR4 RAM running at a frequency of 2666 MHz, and a Windows 10 operating system installed on an NVMe SSD, with an additional SATA SSD serving as extra game storage. All components will be operating at their default frequencies to maintain consistency. To ensure optimal GPU performance, I'm using a capture card for gameplay recording. In terms of game settings, my selections are primarily aimed at achieving frame rates exceeding 60 FPS while maintaining a good graphic fidelity at a 1920 by 1080p resolution. I've used graphic presets for some games, while others required more extensive tweaking to achieve the desired balance between performance and visual quality. Generally, I avoided frame generation technologies and anti-aliasing unless it was included in the graphics preset. To kick things off, I ran Unison Heaven at 1080p on the Ultra preset, cranking up tessellation to the extreme setting. The result showed the RX 580 falling slightly behind the GTX 1060 with an average frame rate of 82 FPS compared to the GTX 1060's 91 FPS. Both cards exhibited 1% low figures at 25 FPS. One noteworthy observation that held true throughout most of my tests was the superior thermal performance of the GTX 1060. This difference may be attributed in part to the specific models I've tested, but power draw also plays a significant role. The RX 580 with a TDP of 185 watts tended to run hotter and less efficiently than the GTX 1060, which boasts a TDP of just 120 watts. While I didn't include this information in my specs comparison, it's worth considering, especially if you plan to pair either card with a lower wattage power supply. Moving on, the next test involved Unison Superposition at 1080p high preset. Once again, the GTX 1060 outperformed the RX 580, boasting a 47 FPS average and a 1% low figure of 37 FPS. The RX 580 wasn't far behind with an average of 42 FPS and a similar 1% low of 38 FPS. For the first game test, I delved into CSGO, cranking up the settings all the way to their highest at 1080p. During a bot match on Dust 2, the RX 580 averaged 220 FPS, while the GTX 1060 achieved an average of 237 FPS with a more favorable 1% low figure. In Global Offensive, either card will deliver an exceptional high refresh rate gaming experience. This trend continued in Rocket League, another esports title. Performance remained nearly identical between the two cards at 1080p with the highest settings. Both cards consistently delivered over 200 FPS on average, making them suitable choices for competitive esports setups, delivering fast-paced, full HD gameplay. In the classic benchmarking game, GTA 5, neither card faced much of a challenge. At 1080p with the highest settings, the GTX 1060 averaged 82 FPS, while the RX 580 averaged just 71 FPS, during my 20 minutes of gameplay as I followed a similar path through Los Santos. Both cards provided excellent performance overall, but the GTX 1060 edged ahead in handling GTA 5. Fortnite yielded some interesting performance differences. I ran the game in DX12 with most settings set to medium and epic view distance. Throughout the match, the RX 580 maintained exceptional smoothness while the GTX 1060 exhibited occasional stutters, as evidenced by the 1% low figure of 37 FPS. Nevertheless, both cards handled the game admirably, delivering an identical average of 92 FPS with impressive visuals, a stark improvement compared to my previous video card test in Fortnite. Assassin's Creed Unity, one of my personal favorites among older AAA titles, was next on the testing list. Running it at 1080p with the high preset, the RX 580 finally took a lead with a 95 FPS average and a 1% low of 65 FPS. The GTX 1060 followed closely with an average of 90 FPS and a minor 3 FPS advantage in its 1% low figure. In Assassin's Creed Origins, the GTX 1060 secured a notable victory at the 1080p high preset. The RX 580 performed decently, albeit with slightly less stability, averaging just 56 FPS, which remains perfectly playable. In contrast, the GTX 1060 exhibited a more consistent benchmarking run with a 68 FPS average. Horizon Zero Dawn demonstrated fewer disparities when running at 1080p medium settings. The RX 580 and the GTX 1060 performed nearly identically, although I did notice slightly more screen tearing with the RX 580. Nonetheless, in-game performance remained exceptionally smooth. Forza Horizon 5 presented a similar scenario with the RX 580 narrowly outperforming the GTX 1060 at the medium preset during the built-in benchmark. Even in a fast-paced racing game, I personally believe that an average of around 80 FPS is more than sufficient for a great gaming experience. Lastly, I decided to challenge the cards with Cyberpunk 2077. At 1080p with medium settings, the RX 580 finally secured a clear victory with an average frame rate 9 FPS higher and a 1% low 8 FPS better than its counterpart. It's evident why these two cards are frequently compared. Their in-game performance proved to be remarkably similar, nearly identical in some instances. However, after considering the overall performance and stability across various titles, I would have to give the edge to the GTX 1060. It outperformed the RX 580 in more titles and generally provided a more consistent gaming experience. Furthermore, it maintained better thermal management, with my card running noticeably cooler overall. Reaching the final verdict on which card to choose was quite challenging. I weighed the three primary factors I used for this comparison. While I concluded that the onboard specs comparison ended in a tie, I was leaning towards awarding the win to the GTX 1060 due to its slightly superior performance in the games I put to the test. However, I want to emphasize that my channel primarily focuses on budget-conscious viewers, and in that context, the RX 580 often presents itself as a more budget-friendly option, frequently available at a lower price point. Personally, when assembling a budget PC, I would opt for an 8GB RX 580 given the opportunity. But I'm also eager to hear your thoughts and experiences. If you've used either of these cards, please share your choice and the reason behind it in the comments. In any case, I hope you found this GPU comparison informative and enjoyable. I plan to create similar videos with more in-depth game tests in the future. If you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you.